So between 1880 and around 1920, we had the Progressive Era, with the goal to improve American society in many different areas. Certain groups that are going to benefit from these progressive policies will be women, African Americans, there'll be workers. So we look at laws that help workers and reduce laissez-faire, so there's going to be more government intervention. Drugs and food will start to become regulated, and big issues regarding the economy will be fixed and improved upon. So one of the first terms we need to look at is what is a muckraker. And this is someone who exposes problems or corruptions in society. And their goal is to fix them. And how do we do that? Passing laws. So politics is going to be very important in doing this and bringing attention to make people aware and upset. And then they'll force their politicians to make some changes. So on this chart on the left, these are groups of some muckrakers you must know, and they're using both books and photos to pull at people's heartstrings so that they pass or force their legislators to pass laws to fix society. One of the more notable muckrakers was Upton Sinclair, and he had wrote a book, The Jungle, and this was about problems in the meatpacking industry. This will eventually lead to Congress and the President passing laws to regulate the meat industry. A gentleman by the name of Jacob Riis took photos of poverty and showed homeless children and tenements so that laws would be passed to improve the lives of lower income Americans. The suffrage movement, is something we'll talk about in a minute, but before we get there, let's look at some economic issues. So, the 16th Amendment deals with the graduated income tax. The more money you make, the more you're expected to pay in taxes. Next is the 17th Amendment to the Constitution with the direct election of senators. So that means you and I and all American citizens get to choose our own senators. And then Prohibition, the 18th Amendment, made alcohol illegal. The 19th Amendment was suffrage, or vote for women, women having the right to vote. These are 4 important amendments that are important to know, and if you have difficulty remembering them, flashcards are a great tool. So again, the suffrage movement, is the right to vote, suffrage, and women, with some men, had a meeting in New York called the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, and they wrote something similar to the Declaration of Independence and called it the Declaration of Sentiments. Sentiment is a feeling, so it was about how women wanted equal rights to men. All right, this is about the right to vote. Some states gave women suffrage or the right to vote first before the federal government passed the 19th Amendment. And then in 1920, Congress passed the 19th Amendment that said all women in the U.S. could vote. 2 women you want to make sure you associate with suffrage and voting are Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. Both of them worked tirelessly to help women. During the era of segregation and Jim Crow, many African Americans worked to improve the lives of African Americans. Marcus Garvey, due to violence, wanted African Americans to move to Africa, but this was not popular at all. In the African American community, it was not popular. Major advocate for African Americans was Booker T. Washington, and he wanted gradual change or slow change. So he thought that African Americans could improve their lives best through vocational education. That would be getting skilled jobs in factories, working with their hands and having specific skills. W.E.B. Du Bois had a different opinion. He wanted immediate change. He wanted African Americans to get a good education so that they could go on to college and have careers at the same level as white Americans. He helped form the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and they used the court system to win victories to improve the lives for African Americans. Notable female crusader at this time was Ida Tarbell. Excuse me, that's a typo. That should be Ida Wells. Ida B. Wells. And she led a crusade against lynching, which, if you remember, was a tactic used to hang African Americans if they broke social norms or if people just wanted to use violence against African Americans. There's many problems in inner cities where political machines led by political bosses would take bribes and corruption. One of the most notable was Boss Tweed of New York City. And he was a corrupt New York City politician who took bribes, aka money, for political favors. This was not democratic and is not fair to the average voter. So people criticized him and others. And one of the famous authors was Thomas Nast, a muckraker. He was a cartoonist. He used political cartoons to expose corruption. As a result, many states passed things called initiatives, referendums, and recalls. And these together help give more power to voters and the people. And as a result, we can say that together these increased democracy, giving more power to the people, taking it out of the hands of some of the politicians who could become corrupt. So people had more of a say in local politics. These were all good things. Here we see trusts, Standard Oil. In this political cartoon, it's represented as large contributors and having a lot of power. And these trusts worked with other businesses to influence Congress by giving them money. They were bribing them. So this is not good, because this is not democracy. And this is showing Congress as the little guy getting influenced by the big business. The most famous or notable progressive president was Teddy Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, and he was considered a progressive president. Let's look at a couple of the reasons why. When it came to monopolies and trusts, he did not like them. He thought they were bad for competition, bad for the U.S. economy, so he became known as a trust buster, and he helped break up a lot of illegal trusts, which was good for the American economy. One of the laws he used was only a few years old when he became president, and it was called the Sherman Antitrust Act. So it allowed the government to break up bad trusts. With regards to the environment, President Roosevelt was a conservationist. He wanted to conserve or preserve certain parts of nature by creating national parks. After reading The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, he had asked Congress to regulate the food industry, so he helped pass the Meat Inspection Act. Okay, so we're going to see more government regulation in business, not laissez-faire. And they passed another law called the Pure Food and Drug Act. The goal was to keep drugs and food more safe for the American consumer. Different than previous presidents, Teddy Roosevelt protected workers, for example, coal miners, by supporting labor unions during strikes. So he was much more of a proponent of labor unions, getting better wages for workers. And a recap of some of the most important laws and events during this time period is the Sherman Antitrust Act, which made trusts illegal, Pure Food and Drug Act, as well as the Meat Inspection Act, and this increased protection of food and drugs, which is good for Americans. The 16th Amendment, which was the graduated income tax, the more you make, the more you pay. Then we had the 17th Amendment, which was the direct election of senators. So voters like you and I get to pick our own senators for our state. The Federal Reserve System was a federal banking system to help the economy. And it did this by helping control the supply of money. So if there was too much money, there would be inflation. If there was too little money in the economy, we'd have a depression. So that was the goal, was to help the economy. The 18th Amendment was passed, and this was prohibition. To prohibit is to not allow. And what was not allowed? Alcohol. Okay, this was part of something called the temperance movement, led by many women who were upset by their husbands abusing alcohol. And then the 19th Amendment relates to suffrage, which means voting. So women can now vote. They were not allowed to vote before 1920. And again, the most notable progressive president was Teddy Roosevelt, and he helped form the Progressive Party.